national interest is not always the sum of all our single or special interests. We are all Americans together, and we must not forget that the common good is our common interest and our individual responsibility.
In Jimmy Carter's final week in the White House, he spoke to the nation in a farewell address. The former president warned Americans that without unity, we would be unable to solve the problems facing the nation. Carter died Sunday at the age of 100 after spending nearly 2 years in hospice care.
For more now on Carter's legacy, we turn to a legend of our own, former CBS News president and executive producer of 48 Hours, Susan Zirinsky, also a former White House producer who spent a decade covering Jimmy Carter and the Ronald Reagan administration. Z, as she's known around here, is now the president of See It Now Studios, which is a Paramount Global production that works in conjunction with all the different shows with documentaries and unscripted series. Z, you're also the person who put us in these jobs, so please send your thanks our way.
So you owe me.
Yeah, we do owe you big time, and the whole network does. But before we get into the questions here about Jimmy, I want to show a clip from you in the field, 1979. You got a close-up.
I'm really anxious to see this.
Of presidential.
I've been waiting to see this all morning.
Her first big break came when she was covering Jimmy Carter, the day he collapsed jogging near Camp David.
CBS News producer Susan Zirinsky, who was running behind the president, tells what happened.
My first sight was the president being supported by what looked like Secret Service runners under his arms. You know, he looked shaky. He was very white.
Camp David.
That's exactly how I pictured you.
Yeah.
Right, even there, Z, you look like the young sort of whippersnapper firebrand that you were back when you were just, coming out, starting out.
You know, the president was running. I was the White House producer.
Running behind him.
I was running behind him. My husband was with me. And I thought he had a heart attack. I mean, there was real fear. This guy turned totally gray. And the only way down from the race where this point was, crews happened to be at that point. I grabbed the tape, and you had to run 3.5, 4 miles down to the bottom. There was no other way down. So my first appearance on the Weekend News.
I love it. I love it. What was it like covering the Carter White House? And did you have a sense in the press corps that this was a presidency going well or not so well?
I think not so well. And I think there was a bit of snobbery. You know, it was from the South. People just couldn't get a hold of themselves in terms of his accent. But, I mean, it should have been a press dream. A peanut farmer, a nuclear physicist, state government, governor, president, and afterwards, of course, the Nobel Peace Prize. But it just didn't work out that way because you have to remember that the press corps was coming out of the Nixon era. So they had a little PTSD.
Oh, yeah.
And so they didn't really trust anything. President Carter was very, very vocal. I will not lie. He wanted to restore credibility and faith. But the journalists, who saw themselves as potentially a Woodward and Bernstein, the key reporters in Watergate, they constantly were looking. They constantly didn't trust him.
So, Z, what's interesting, too, is just like every president going back to Thomas Jefferson, he had sort of a difficult relationship with the press. And Douglas Brinkley pointed out something that even I remember as a child watching Ted Koppel, who's now a CBS News contributor, but Ted Koppel then at ABC with that over-the-shoulder showing the number of days that the hostages had been held in Iran. And the president believed that the press had a role to play in him losing the election.
I disagree with that. The reality was there were 52 hostages for 444 days, but it was so difficult. And, you know, they did attempt to get them out. The CIA under Stan Turner had this mission, and it was a disaster. Among the press, it was called Desert Classic 1. The choppers failed, they crashed, U.S. servicemen were killed, and none of the hostages came out. So it was an extraordinary time.
But was Jimmy Carter accessible as a president to the press? Were there press conferences? Were there a lot of interviews?
Yes, I mean, he was, but don't forget, he lived in this house on the road in Plains, and we were across the street in a field. I even had the phone company put a jack up on the telephone pole so I could plug in with my phone. And he was accessible. You know, there are times where you found yourself in these bizarre circumstances. I guess I'll tell the story at the end when Carter had lost the election, wanted to go back to planes. You cannot underestimate the impact that planes had on his humanity, his soul, his faith, all of that. So what happened was nobody was covering Carter with really any zeal. It was just like a week before the inauguration. And so we're across the street, camera crew and me. Correspondents wouldn't be going on those kind of stakeouts. And he takes off. Secret Service, very small, guy with the football, with the nuclear codes, handcuffed to his wrist, and they take off. And so I have no idea where we're going, so we're shooting. And then he stops, and we turn in a road, and he gets out. And I'm respectful. I'm the producer. I'm not a White House correspondent. I'm respectful, and he turns around, and he motions forward, and I turn around to see who's behind me, and he was motioning for me to come forward. So I gently walked towards the president, and I said, Mr. President, where are we? And he said, I want to visit my family's graves and Rosalind's graves. You know, this is the core value. And so, of course, I said, what are you thinking as your presidency is in its final days? And he said, I feel failure. And I thought he might say from losing the election, but he said, I feel failure that I was unable to get those 52 hostages out.
Wow.
And it haunts me.
Yeah.
And he went on about it. And it was an amazing moment as a producer to be alone with the president. And we talked for about 15 minutes. It just was this shadow that covered everything. Carter achieved a lot. I mean, you have to give him his due. Department of Energy, Department of Education, the Peace Accord, up at Camp David. These were pretty amazing things. There's one amazing fact.
Yeah.
Not a single bomb was dropped. Not a single gunshot was fired. He prevented the wars in Israel, in Iran, and in Panama. He did give the Panama Canal back, but
now that's back in the news.
Yeah, that's back in the news.
We're going to take it back again.
I was in the Panama War when they got Noriega.
So would you take a break, please, from documentaries and write a memoir so that we can all enjoy these stories at length, one? And two, thank you for the chocolate cake again this year. People talk about the Tom Cruise coconut cream like this is an amazing... The Z chocolate cake. I celebrated my birthday with that chocolate cake this year.
Fantastic.
You had some. You were there.
Oh, I was there. We had some.
I should show, if there's enough time, that, in Plains, Georgia, there wasn't much to do except shop in the 5 stores that were there. And so I have with me my Jimmy Carter fan, because it was so bloody hot there, especially during the baseball games. And then I have my Jimmy Carter bottle opener.
I love that.
And you went nuts.
And
in
the
Plains,
other,
Georgia.
I don't smoke, but this ashtray was... I went nuts in Plains,
I love
Georgia.
that. I love the bottle opener, and the fan also works to get the black flies and the biting.
It was an amazing presidency to cover because of the press relationship and
the gnats.
And the gnats. But it was tough. I do think history will reassess the failure that was quote unquote in the Carter presidency.
Yeah. I think you're right. And it's already begun, actually. Susan Zirinsky, thank you very much.
you.
Shauna says thank you as well from her remote holiday vacation destination, wherever she is. We really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Z.
Appreciate for having me on.